This is Duke University.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Karsh Conversations on Artificial Intelligence. I'm Catherine Allen, Assistant Director in the Duke Career Center, where I co-manage our data, technology, and engineering career community with my colleague, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Corey. Like Catherine said, I also manage the data tech and engineering community, and I'm the career specialist for that community.
You are about to meet Jack Parker, our moderator and our panelist for the evening. Jack is pursuing a master's degree in electrical and computer engineering here at Duke in the Pratt School of Engineering with a concentration on machine learning. He hopes to spend his career doing all he can to steer the development of artificial intelligence in a direction that benefits humanity instead of doing harm. His undergraduate background is in mathematics, and he holds a master's in education. He spent the previous 2 years teaching middle and high school math at the Roxbury Latin School in Boston. We hope you'll enjoy this panel. I'm going to turn it over to Jack Parker, ECU student, master's student in the Pratt School of Engineering. Thank you, Jack.
Thanks so much, Catherine. Yeah, I'm really happy to be here, and thank you everyone for coming out. The first thing I want to do is just allow our panelists to introduce themselves. So maybe starting with Rachel, and then Tabitha, and finally John. If you could just share a little bit about your background and the path that led you to focus your career on AI. So Rachel.
Sure. Hey, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Rachel Friedman, and I'm a PhD student in AI and machine learning at UC Berkeley. So I'm in California now, but I did my undergrad degree at Duke through the Robertson Scholarship Program. And the path that led me to AI was a little bit windy. I actually started out with a very liberal arts, emphasis on arts type, no technical background, studying psychology and theater and creative writing. And about halfway through my undergraduate degree, I came across an open letter that had been written by a number of AI scientists, including my now PhD advisor, talking about potential risks to society and humanity that could come with advanced artificial intelligence. And long story short, I did a bunch more reading on this, became really concerned about this cause area, and realized that just was a lot more important than that was so important that was what I needed to focus my career on. So I did a career change, and now I'm in a PhD.
Great. And Tabitha, what led you to AI?
Yeah, totally. So not similar winding path, but also winding path. So I was a physics and philosophy major during undergrad. Thought I'd go the traditional physics PhD route. Realized after doing some physics internships, I was more interested in presenting about the science and tech and thinking through what we do with it in society. So that led me to a summer on Capitol Hill, where I worked with the House Energy and Commerce Committee, dove into the world of science policy, loved it, took a gap year abroad while I sorted out kind of that career pivot and what that would look like. Ended up at Duke for a master's of bio and tech ethics and science policy. While I was there, I specifically concentrated on autonomous vehicles. So after graduating from Duke, I spent 3 years in the autonomous vehicle world at a nonprofit that was dedicated to taking information from the technical sector and breaking it down for the public and policymakers so that they could have informed conversations and participate when we're thinking about the technology and how it can serve their needs. 6 months ago, I moved to a new role here at MITRE in their AI and Autonomy Innovation Center, where I'm working half in the management at the operations side and half as a technical employee. So I'm working on we're doing a lot of efforts in assuring AI systems to make sure they're safe, secure, reliable, robust, equitable, using my background in ethics and autonomous systems. So it's been an opportunity for me to kind of step back from that single use case of autonomous vehicles with AI and instead look at kind of those foundational questions for how AI can be serving people in a positive way.
Great. And John, yeah, what was the path that led you to focus on AI?
Yeah, like our other two panelists and probably most people in this field, I didn't originally start my career in this field. I was actually in aerospace when I first left school. And eventually one thing sort of led to another, and I started working for a company that provided weather forecasting to most of the major utilities, airlines, transportation agencies, et cetera. And eventually I took over and I ran that company, and we started investing heavily in building machine learning based forecasting tools that could predict the impact of weather on different organizations like electric utilities and their grid, predict things like turbulence for airlines, et cetera. And so I largely gained my experience through working with it in industry. I left that what I was doing there a few years ago and joined the faculty here at Duke, and I now run the AI master's program in the Pratt School of Engineering.
Great. So I'm imagining that we'll divide our conversation kind of roughly into 2 chapters. And the first chapter, I'd like us to focus on 2 primary questions. The first is, how the heck would someone ever figure out if AI is a good fit for them among all of the career paths that they could choose? And the second question might be something like, if it does seem like working on AI is a good fit for somebody, how can they get a strong start in that field? And in the second chapter, we can move on to a different kind of set of questions. But yeah, so on to chapter 1, you all clearly have a lot of collective experience working with AI, and I'm sure that our audience would like to hear your thoughts on how to have a meaningful, successful career in AI. So first of all, just that the classic question, what does your day-to-day look like, and what challenges do you come up against frequently, just so someone can get a sense of what a day in the life of someone working on AI is like. So I'll allow you to, anybody can jump in and take that question as you will.
I can take it.
Sure.
So my day-to-day involves a lot of what I would call research tasks and academic tasks. Research tasks are things like reading research papers, writing papers, giving mentees or interns feedback on their projects, doing math, trying to prove things, design algorithms, implement algorithms, run experiments, analyze the data, all the things that relate to coming up with novel research ideas and testing them out. And then academic things are components of kind of keeping academia running. So things like doing peer review for journals or conferences, evaluating applications for lots of different things, helping to run my lab, university and lab specific admin, things like that. And then a decent amount of, as a PhD student, for a while I needed to take classes, so I was taking those. Coming up soon, I'll need to be teaching. I also have periodic exams that I need to pass, so I study for those. Those sorts of things that I need to progress towards my degree. And challenges. The biggest one, I think, in research, especially in the type of research I do, which is focused on safety problems that we anticipate to arise with advanced artificial intelligence, is that it's very difficult to get good, quick feedback, because the problems that I'm most concerned about are ones that don't yet exist. It's difficult. It's not like I can just come up with a potential solution and then test it and see if it works. And if it doesn't, notice the ways in which it fails, which is more like what my experience was working as an engineer before this. So I have to try and come up with ways to evaluate my idea, to quantify and to evaluate my ideas. That can be very abstract. Try to come up with concrete ways to do that give me a strong, as a machine learning researcher, I would say, training signal to tell me what I should do more of, what I should do less of, that kind of thing. So mainly, and then the other big challenge is, as a PhD student, especially in my program, we're extremely independent. So we don't really have a project lead or someone else's research agenda that we're trying to follow. We're responsible for coming up with our own independently, while we're also doing this research and doing all these other things. So trying to develop my own unique views that I can back up very strongly and feel strongly about, and then figuring out how to implement those and get meaningful data when it's difficult to find these good, strong sources of feedback are, I think, the main challenges I'm facing right now.
Great. And how about John or Tabitha? What is your day-to-day look like, and is it different or very similar to Rachel's? And highlight some of the challenges that you face on a day-to-day basis.
You want to go ahead?
Go ahead, Tabitha.
Oh, me? Okay. Yeah, so I think I kind of mentioned, I sort of straddle this interesting position where I'm half on the operations management side and half technical, which is really fun. It lets me kind of jump in both worlds. So on the more like operations side of things, I'm working with like budget, strategic events, communications, working with some of our external partners, facilitating relationships, bringing together collaborative groups. And then on the technical side of things, I get to help. So some of it is building off of that work. So I get to do a lot of work where, I'll work with our programmers to kind of help develop outward facing materials or information for an open source tool. So taking that technical work, understanding it, making sure I'm distilling it so that it can be more understandable to a broader audience or a government sponsor or somebody that we're working with in that way. Very recently I was participating in an NSF collaborative workshop on ethics with AI. So it can kind of really, really vary day to day. Also a lot of emails. That's all jobs involve a lot of emails. So that's the less fun part of the job. But yeah, it's a really interesting, getting to kind of support and build and collaborate with the people within my lab and within my team to help ensure that we're hitting kind of strategic goals within the company. So I do a lot of cross MITRE works with government agencies all across, whether it's health, defense, transportation, things like that. So I get to do kind of a lot of those cross conversations to make sure that, we're successfully kind of selling our AI technical capabilities to those domains so they can then take it to government sponsors, making sure we're not over promising what the technology can do, aligning task missions. So it's it's a really interesting goal of trying to make sure that we're, using AI and implementing these solutions to specific tasks and in a way that, is safer and better when we're talking about these like high risk consequential uses.
Great. And my day-to-day as a professor obviously involves a lot of lecturing, preparing for lecture, grading, talking with students, et cetera. And by the way, I see several of my students on, so hello to everybody. Other than that, though, I'm really fortunate that I have the opportunity in what I do to spend a lot of my time learning. It's something I love. It's why I teach. And this is a field I think that's pretty unique in that if you commit to a career in this field, you're also committing to continue to learn for a lifetime, because this is a very immature field. Frankly, some of the things I teach now didn't exist 5 years ago when I was building products in industry. And so I didn't learn them then. I have to learn them now so I can teach them to my students. And so that's a fact of life for me, is that I do spend a fair amount of my time kind of keeping up on the latest things, and then also trying to distill all that and figure out sort of what is likely to stand the test of time and is worth teaching to the students, and what is not and likely will be replaced in another year or two. And that's also a challenge for me, is trying to find the balance between making sure that our students have a really strong foundation in the methods that have stood the test of time, but also at the same time giving them exposure to some of the latest emerging things so that they're prepared with those when they go into industry.
Yeah, maybe could you give a few examples of things in both of those categories? So, if someone's interested in pursuing a career in AI, they're going to want to know, what are the main skills I should focus on developing and getting really good at? So maybe give a few examples of ones that have stood the test of time that are, definitely worth investing in, and then some skills that are kind of on the cutting edge that someone in a master's program or a PhD program might focus on.
Yeah, so the way our master's program is structured is we spend kind of the first semester making sure that the fundamentals are really strong. In their modeling class, for example, we do very little deep learning. It's pretty much all focused on really the classical techniques. for a couple of reasons. One, because you can't really understand what's happening when you're using neural networks without having a good solid grasp of basic things like linear regression and logistic regression, and techniques that have been around for a really long time. But also too, because those things are still very commonly used in industry. There's sort of this, I think, misconception that everybody, when they're building products, they all use neural networks and transformers and everything else. And in some specific areas that might be true, but a lot of companies, including my own company that I used to run, are putting in production far simpler models based on techniques that have been around for a really long time, and generally still work really well. So those are things like the more classical things that most people have had some exposure to at some point: linear regression, logistic regression, et cetera. And then our second semester of our program, we sort of then start to shift to put more focus on some of the more recent advancements. So a lot of that is focused on neural networks. We get into looking at using transformers, GANs, et cetera. Things that really haven't been around all that long, but have made a huge impact, in the few years that they've been here.
Yeah, and Rachel and Tabitha, what in your work day to day, what are the skills that you're like, oh my gosh, yes, I'm so glad that I had a class in that, or I'm so glad that I learned that a while back and invested time in?
I'm going to jump in real quick. I feel like John gave a great list, but I will definitely say make sure you're taking classes outside of comp sci and engineering too. I don't love the term soft skills, but those kind of skills of being a stronger writer, thinking about interdisciplinary angles, whether it's law, psych, sociology, anything like that, those different perspectives are really valuable. When we think about the future of AI, we're going to need this more integrated approach there. So just anything I would say you can do there, if you can fit it in your schedule, I think those classes are really worthwhile. Sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
That's all right. That actually dovetails nicely because you asked what classes are really useful, and I took close to zero technical engineering or math classes so far. So and I've just been, my technical background has been almost entirely self-taught. So for me, the really absolutely critical skill is the meta skill of being able to pick up things as you go, be continuously learning, learn when you encounter something that's just completely outside of your background, being able to figure out whether it's important to understand, and then what materials you need to actually pick it apart and understand it. Because as was mentioned a few minutes ago, artificial intelligence is constantly changing. I started my PhD 3 years ago, and already the cool new thing, the dominant paradigm has shifted from when I started. And so that's just going to continue happening. Beyond that, all the topics that were listed are really important. Linear algebra is really useful, understanding fundamentals and mathematics and engineering principles before just jumping straight into working with neural networks is really useful. Writing is also very useful. I was someone who did a lot of creative writing my whole life, and I've really been surprised by how much that has come in handy, how much my ability to write quickly and clearly has helped me in my research career. So definitely something good to work on.
Yeah. One of the topics that often comes up when I'm talking with other people who are in the ECE ML master's program at Duke is, should we be navigating towards getting a PhD if we want to have a career in AI? And so how do you three tend to advise people on, whether or not they should get a PhD, whether or not that's going to be useful for their career? What light can you shed on that? Yeah.
I get asked this question a lot, so maybe I can start it off and then you two can fill in, help me come up with a better answer to this. So what I say is it totally just depends on what kind of job you want to get. And there are some jobs within artificial intelligence that you definitely need a PhD to apply. And there's some jobs where you don't need it. And honestly, it's probably in that case a waste of time because you can self-teach yourself or learn by doing the stuff that you need for that other role. So the things that you absolutely do need a PhD for are very research heavy roles. So this would be academia, obviously, if you want to be a professor, or research scientist, roles at places like DeepMind or OpenAI usually require a PhD for you to apply. And then jobs that don't require the PhD and where it's not necessarily the most efficient way to gain the skills are things like research engineers who would work at those same places. There's research engineers who work at my lab, who I know who work at DeepMind, OpenAI, other AI research organizations who are doing more on the implementation side and less on the math and writing papers side. And then also there's a lot of general machine learning engineering and software engineering that you can do. Artificial intelligence and ML can be applied to a really wide variety of domains. And it takes people who are experts in it to like figure out what techniques to use and how to apply it to specific real world circumstances, which I'm sure Tabitha can speak to very well. But just in general, I recommend the absolute best way to figure out which of these is the best fit for you is through internships. If it's at all possible, I highly recommend that people try and do at least one research internship and at least one engineering internship to see which of those they like better. And then also I recommend looking at research papers in your area of interest, because those are the kinds of things you'd be writing as a PhD student and as a research scientist or professor, and thinking, how do I feel about this? Would I be excited? Do I wish that I had written this, or do I think, oh man, that's, getting really in depth and abstract, and I'd rather be dealing with some real world data and building a product that people can use, and try and get a gut feeling from that.
Yeah, I think that was a great answer. I don't have much to add. Despite the title slide, I actually don't have a PhD myself. Common misconception. I think Rachel's distinction between sort of research orientation versus application orientation is an important thing to think about when you think about opportunities in AI and where you want to go with your career. If you want to make a career in research, I won't say it's a requirement, but it is very, very, very helpful to have a PhD in order to do that. If you want to work in applying AI in a specific domain area, you're maybe better served getting a PhD in that area, or not getting a PhD and just going and getting experience in that particular area. So I think that's a kind of a foundational question that everybody who wants to, be involved with AI and machine learning sort of needs to think about for themselves is do they get excited by the prospect of doing foundational research and designing new, architectures of machine learning models, or, do they have a passion for applying technologies and methods to solve problems in a specific domain? And I think the answer to that question, will determine whether it makes sense to consider the PhD route. And as Rachel said, really the best way to decide the answer to that question for yourself is to go try it. Do internships, job shadow, talk to people, whatever you can do to get insight into those worlds that you think might be interesting to you, and that'll give you, a good understanding of what it's like, and then you can decide if that's something that excites you or not.
As John was talking about, going into a domain and getting experience there, that's absolutely why I decided to do a master's instead of a PhD. I was just really eager to get into what was still a pretty emerging field of autonomous vehicles. And, I just personally was like, I think this is an area that I can learn a lot being in the industry while it's there, while it's kind of fresh. And that was what I was more interested in versus going into a classroom. I wasn't sure by the time I would get out of PhD how that industry might have shifted. So I think it kind of gets to, I know like John and Rachel were talking earlier about different kind of hype or like things that will come and go with AI, like the new cutting edge. And so I'd say if you're somebody who's really interested in wanting to hit what's the hot thing for right now and what's the hot piece for this, then I think there's a lot to be said to going straight into the industry and kind of giving it a chance to sort of see how that goes. But if you are more interested in digging into kind of those pieces that John was talking about, what's going to stand the test of time, what are the long-term pieces, or if you're interested in some of the impacts with other fields, I think there's pros and cons to both, but I would say kind of what gets you excited when you're thinking about AI. I think in addition to the internships can kind of lead you a path of what journeys are most interesting, what topics are most interesting, and whether going straight into industry and trying that for a little while, knowing you could go back to a PhD, or staying in academia and testing out different opportunities. They're both really valid options.
Nice.
Yeah. Sorry, I have one more note on that, if that's okay.
Yeah, jump in.
In my program, it's really common for people to graduate from an undergraduate or a master's degree and then work in industry for a couple of years before starting a PhD. And I actually personally did this myself. And that's not something that's looked down on at all in PhD applications. And I think it's a really big benefit in lots of different dimensions. For one thing, it lets you try out the industry and see whether, if you're really loving it, maybe you just want to stay, maybe, or you can decide then whether you want to go back and apply to the PhDs. And if you do decide that you want to go and apply to PhDs, that's not lost time. You get a lot of benefits from that. You get a financial cushion, which is very useful when you go onto a PhD stipend, but you also get with software engineering practices, if you're doing software engineering and project management skills that can really help you on research projects in the PhD. You get extra time to pursue areas of interest. I was doing this partially to build up my technical background, since that was kind of happening after my undergraduate degree for me. There's lots of different benefits. So that's definitely a pretty reasonable way to go, I think.
Great. Just one last question before we move into part 2 of the conversation. I think a point that caused a lot of people confusion, including myself, is just the distinctions between machine learning and AI. Is AI a particular application of machine learning? Yeah, how much daylight is there between these two concepts? And is there such a thing as someone who would be a good fit for machine learning but not an AI, or vice versa? And yeah, how do you distinguish between these two concepts?
Asking the tough questions.
Yeah, I could start. Honestly, a lot of people use them interchangeably, especially now. Wasn't always the case, but now I think it's pretty common. And frankly, I myself do. Technically, they're not the same. AI is a sort of a much broader field of trying to replicate human intelligence using technology. Machine learning is a subset of methods which can accomplish the goals of AI. There are other ways to accomplish those goals as well outside of machine learning. But it's become very common for companies to use them interchangeably. Nowadays, the field of AI, again, this wasn't always the case. Historically, the field is focused on other areas in addition to machine learning, but nowadays, I'd say the field of AI is almost entirely, focused on applications of what we would call machine learning.
Some other components of AI that you can do academic research on that aren't considered machine learning are things like search and planning, probabilistic programming, game theory, and causal inference. But I'd say even also within research, even also within academic research, the vast majority of AI research is on machine learning.
Great. So let's jump into part 2 now. Just like with any other powerful technology that humans have developed, there are some extraordinary promises that AI seems to make to society. And it also seems like there are some major risks that this technology presents. So I'd like for us to just together paint a picture for the audience of kind of both sides of this coin. And maybe we could start with the positive side. We can like to hear from each of you, what applications of AI do you most hope to see in the future, and what are you most excited about with respect to this technology? Maybe we'll start with Tabitha, and then John, and then Rachel.
Absolutely. So for me, the really exciting thing is technology that is going to enhance freedoms. Autonomous vehicles that allow people who are vision impaired independent mobility without having to rely on other services, other people. Those are things that can help fill the gaps that in inequities that exist in our society. Our current transportation system has a lot of problems with it. There's a lot of people who aren't serviced, who don't have access, who weren't part of the voice when it was created in the first place. So I think there's a lot of really interesting work that can be done as we're thinking about these new technologies and these new approaches to be more inclusive from the beginning. So that's the thing that gets me really excited and optimistic about the tech.
Yeah, I think there's a huge potential to be able to use AI to help us live our lives better in a lot of different areas, from better provision of healthcare, improving the quality and the accessibility of healthcare, to education, and making education more personal, for every individual student at all different levels of education, to unleashing creativity and allowing creative people to more easily express themselves. There's a tremendous a number of ways, and really all imaginable areas that AI can improve our lives, help people live healthier, help them be more efficient in what they do. Yeah, it's almost unlimited. I think the number of potential applications and ways it can help us. And I think the second half of your, did you also ask about sort of the dangers or the risks?
Let's stick on the bright side for now, and then we
Okay,
can.
all right. That's I was gonna say it's a lot to cram in one question. So yeah, let's start with that. Rachel, go ahead.
Yeah, gotta split them up. I'm really excited about opportunities to use AI to save human lives. And I think autonomous vehicles are a really great example of this, because so many people die in driving accidents each year. There's lots of components of driving that are understandably really hard for humans, like doing the same thing for many, many hours in a row and not getting fatigued, watching all around you for potential collisions, all these things that are really difficult for humans to do, but quite easy for computers to do. I don't mean to imply that building autonomous vehicles is easy, because it's clearly not at all. But it seems like something where if we develop advanced enough autonomous vehicles, they can clearly just do a much safer job than humans can. And since so many people die from driving accidents each year, that like has a concrete, that cashes out concretely in human lives saved, which I think is really fantastic.
Nice. And so now let's paint a picture of the other side of this coin, right? What are we most worried about when it comes to AI? I just want to paint a really vivid picture for the audience of the risks and the ethical concerns that come about with introducing this powerful technology. So maybe we'll start with Rachel.
Did you say start with Rachel? Sorry.
I'll start with Rachel. Yes, sorry.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I didn't hear that. So I'm working on, as I said earlier, it was risks from AI and potential downsides that motivated me to join the field. But I'm interested in a specific class of risks, which is what happens or what could go wrong in the future when we have more advanced, more intelligent AI, and we're applying it to a broader range of tasks, or to tasks that are more nuanced or complicated, in particular tasks where it's really difficult for us as engineers or as users to specify formally in math or code exactly what it is that we want that system to do. It turns out that for many things, it's quite difficult to write down a formal definition that like exactly specifies everything we care about in the domain. And it gets even more difficult when we think about systems that might be applied to lots of different domains, like as we move towards artificial general intelligence, or systems that are applied towards really complicated domains where we're not sure how to fully understand it already anyway. And so I'm worried about creating very intelligent AIs who do what we tell them to do, but not necessarily what we want them to do. And some intuition for why this could become a safety concern or an existential risk is, I think of it as like, if you think about the gap between humans and gorillas, gorillas are a lot more physically stronger than we are. They win in a fist fight, but we're smarter, and we're able to like use that increased intelligence in order to be dominant over the gorillas. And then on top of that, humans as a society don't want to hurt gorillas, but we have goals that don't really align with what the gorillas want either. And so just in the course of us pursuing these goals, gorillas have ended up almost going extinct just because they've kind of been in our way, or we haven't had a great regard for them. I'm worried about that kind of outcome where we develop very powerful, very intelligent systems that do still do what we tell them to do, but we tell them to do something that's maybe a little bit the wrong thing, and they're able to use that intelligence in order to pursue their goals in a way that might negatively impact us.
And yeah, one thing that people will often say when they are confronted with arguments like this is, why can't we just turn it off? So what do you say to people when they say, yeah, I mean, if AI just starts, misbehaving, if we end up with, an angry little God in a box doing stuff that we don't like, we can just turn it off. So yeah, what do you say to that?
Say I have a very long reading list for you. But in reality, so I bring up the concept of instrumental goals. So whatever goal or objective, cost function, reward function we give to an AI is its final goal. It's the thing that it's trying to achieve. But it turns out that for most final goals, if you have a sufficiently intelligent system, there's lots of intermediate or instrumental goals that are going to be helpful to achieve no matter what that final goal is. Which means when we're reasoning about these systems, we can sort of marginalize over what the final goal is and just think about these intermediate goals. And one of those intermediate goals is not getting turned off. So imagine you're a super intelligent AI and I give you the goal to go make me a cup of coffee. And all you want to do is go make me a cup of coffee. You're not going to like naturally want to go take over the world or some sort of anthropomorphization like that. But if you're going to go make a cup of coffee and then someone tries to turn you off, like you just suggested, and you're intelligent enough to realize if you get turned off, that you can't make the coffee, then you're not going to want to get turned off. And if you're able to reason and anticipate, oh, if humans come near me or if I let them interfere with my system, they might try to turn me off or try to give me another goal that'll prevent me from doing the coffee, then you automatically have this incentive to reduce the threat of interference. So, which is something that might conflict with human goals in the same way that humans building the cities we want has conflicted with gorilla goals. So you can get a agent that doesn't want to let you turn it off and is maybe intelligent enough to make it really difficult for you to turn it off, even if all it wants to do is do some totally benign thing.
Yeah, great. And John, what are the major risks that you're worried about from AI?
For me, there's probably, I mean, there's a few, major areas of concern. One is when you look at sort of who is leading the development of some of the AI that's being used in our world today. It tends to be very, very homogenous groups of people, without representation from all areas of society, and that's a concern, because there's a lot of ways that bias can creep into models. Some of those intentional, but most often unintentional. And it unfortunately, without a kind of diverse representation of people leading the development, it increases the likelihood that or ways that bias can enter into these types of models. That's one. The other concern is just looking at the motivations behind the development and commercialization of AI models. A lot of these things are being driven by tech companies, whose primary motivation is profit to grow a business, right? And sometimes that motivation can come at odds with the best interests of their users. And so that's a concern too when you have mismatched motivations or a profit anytime as a motive in developing models that have an influence on human behavior. Things like recommendation systems is really the prime example there. Those are probably the two areas that concern me the most.
Tabitha, when you think about the risks from AI, what are the ones that stick out most in your mind, and what are the ones that you're trying hardest to mitigate?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, want to like double underline that whole who's developing it and who they're developing it for and what are the outcomes. But another thing that really I'm really concerned about is kind of this like overpromise of AI, to the point where I've seen a lot of people try to define tasks and problems, and rather than like very clearly getting at what they want out of it, they just kind of like stick an AI band-aid on it. They're like, oh, we'll get AI to do this thing. But if but they didn't actually define what the task is, which then leads to all these potential outcomes that can, be not what it was intended, not what it's supposed to be. So I guess it's kind of this like worry that by pursuing AI as this kind of like panacea that can do everything, we will forego other solutions that aren't AI that could have a big impact. So like, yes, autonomous vehicles have this huge potential to make a big difference, but lowering speed limits 10 miles an hour can save, thousands of lives. So it's kind of this making sure that we're thinking about the AI advances, but also what are the other, the human factors or other non-technical solutions, just to make sure that we're kind of putting those in together. And then another one I want to mention too in particular is the education of humans who are in the loop with AI systems. So just making sure that I think a lot of times, if there's a human who's involved in auditing the AI system, developing it, using it, maybe somebody who wasn't directly using it, but who's impacted in a way, I think it's really easy to sometimes, as the researchers, as the developers, to view that from one lens and not think about the difference in education, the difference in understanding that those different people at different points in the AI lifecycle will have, and making sure that we're, communicating that, educating, continuing, so it's not just on that front end as well. That's another thing that worries me.
We're going to move into the Q&A portion soon. I don't see any questions right now in the chat, but I've got just a few more questions to ask. So as those, if anyone in the audience has a question, feel free to unmute and ask the question, or pop it in the chat, whatever works best for you. But yeah, I'd like to get y'all's take on, obviously we want to navigate a path into the future that involves reaping all the benefits from AI that we can, while avoiding these risks. And so what does that look like? How can we do that successfully? What is your picture of how to move forward in this space?
I can jump in first, since I just went last on the negative. So, one thing to kind of mitigate exactly the things I was talking about is making sure that we're building out, realistic understandings of AI's capabilities and failures, and making sure that when we're thinking about this technology and its potential, we're thinking about it as supporting what it means to be human and what our values are, and not just as, I think a lot of times people talk about AI as this sort of inevitable force that it does have the potential to change everything and make things, a lot of positive outcomes, but there's still time to have those conversations, about ethics and about societal integration, that I think sometimes it's easy to kind of paint this narrative where there's not room for that, and it's too late, and we're already here where it's impacting everything. So just, I don't know, making sure that we're really clearly defining the tasks that AI is doing, it's executing, what it's supporting on, and also kind of establishing chains of responsibility for what happens if an autonomous system is involved in something. How does that apply to humans? And again, that gets back to kind of that interdisciplinary piece I was talking about as well, about making sure that our technologists understand ethics understand technology, so that we can, just be holistically thinking about these systems and what good they can do for us.
Yeah, and how about John or Rachel? What are the major things that we need to get right in order to get the most benefits that we can get from this technology, while avoiding the risks?
So a couple of thoughts come to mind. One is again, increasing representation in the field. So growing the AI community and diversifying it, needs to be a big focus. The second is increasing transparency around where AI is being used and how it's being used. I don't think that today we're doing a great job with transparency. I mean, if you think about your average day, if you were to try to if you had a good way to count up the number of times you interact in some way with a machine learning model, your count would probably be pretty high. But I bet you probably don't even know how many times you do interact with a machine learning model, and you certainly don't think about all those times that you do. and it's kind of a scary thing because you're putting your trust in the hands of companies again who may have different motivations than you do. So I think sort of an effort to increase the transparency of where AI is used, why it's used, how it's reaching the recommendations or predictions or whatever it's making, ways to circumvent it, ways to shut it off, ways to circumvent it, ways to tell it when it's wrong. All those things, I think generally we need to do a much better job.
And as AI is getting deployed increasingly broadly and touching increasingly more and more parts of our lives, we can sort of see that trajectory is on the rise even now. I think it's very important to try to anticipate a bit where we'll be a few years down the line, maybe a few decades down the line, and try and think about problems, ethics or safety or equity problems that might come up later on that that have to be solved before the problem arises. Like as a toy example, the off switch problem we were talking about a few minutes ago, where you want an AI to allow you to turn it off. If we wait until we have some sort of robot that's zooming around the floor, open plan office, and won't let anyone turn it off, that's too late. We need to figure that out ahead of time, but that requires not just figuring out how to solve the problem ahead of time, but also anticipating what sorts of problems are likely to occur and how to prioritize them. Something else that I think is important to do is to facilitate, I don't know if coordination is the right word, but like modulating dynamics between corporations, governments, other organizations that are trying to develop really large scale general artificial intelligences, but to avoid falling into a sort of arms race type dynamic where everybody is racing to be the first one past the line with developing some sort of advanced system, some sort of general artificial intelligence. And because they have all of that time pressure, they don't spend the time discussing the ethics and making interpretable systems and verifying that they're safe and doing all these other sorts of work that are really important to do, but slow down development. So we want to try and create economic or coordination systems that reward this kind of safe treading forward and not rewarding rushing forward and just trying to be the first one past the gate.
I see in the chat that Chloe says that she is a career coach and gets a lot of questions asked frequently, and she has some ones that she'd like to share and get your take on. So yeah, Chloe, feel free to just unmute and ask the questions that you get super often.
Great, thanks a lot. Can you all hear me okay? Great, okay. Yeah, so I am a career coach with the Master's in Engineering program here at Pratt, and I would love to share some of the questions I get. I can also put them in chat. I've got them kind of copy pasted, ready to go. I realize we're limited on time, so I think what I'll do is I'll kind of ask them as a group, and y'all can approach answering them on the areas that you feel like you have expertise in, perhaps. So the questions, and I will go ahead and copy and paste them into the chat for your reference, are questions along the lines of, for a student, where are the internships for those who are interested in AI or machine learning? What job titles should they be looking at when they're looking for these kinds of positions? What specific companies should students be looking at to get the kind of experience that they're seeking? And so that's 3. And then finally, what kinds of projects are out there for students who want to get more hands-on experience, maybe before the internship season starts over the summer, things that students can do to kind of get their hands dirty in this space.
Yeah, feel free to, if any of those in particular sticks out to you as like, oh yeah, I have a really good, strong take on this. Yeah, go ahead.
I could start, I guess. Let's see if I can remember them. Where are the internships? A lot of places. Honestly, I mean, I think I find a lot of students in my courses have this misconception that if they want to do machine learning, they need to go to one of the big tech companies. And yes, they do a lot of machine learning, but there's a whole lot of other organizations that do too. I'll put in a little plug. Tomorrow morning, we're having a woman speak at 10:15, Tier 115. If anybody wants to join, you're welcome. She runs what's called the AI Lab at ETS. So ETS is a nonprofit in the education space that does, if you're taking the SAT, the GRE, you should be familiar with ETS. They have a massive AI lab there, looking at how AI can be used to improve personalization of education. They're hiring tons of people. They hired one of my students last summer for an internship. So if a nonprofit in education is hiring, people that do machine learning, almost every other imaginable organization in any field is as well. So I try to encourage this, be a little more creative, with where you look for your career. Beyond wanting to do machine learning, think about what field, what industry, what area really excites you. Do you like education? Do you like healthcare? Are you passionate about that, climate, et cetera? And then look for opportunities kind of in that space to apply machine learning. And I would suggest you're highly likely to find opportunities for jobs and internships where you can apply machine learning in those areas. But I think a lot of people by default, they kind of go right to, the Metas and the Googles and the Amazons, et cetera. So I'll answer that one, and I'll leave the other ones for our other panelists here.
And there's also,
Good.
sorry.
No, go for it, Rachel.
There's also summer academic research opportunities available. My lab runs, we just call it an internship program, and it's pretty much like your standard internship application process. We've got resume screen, coding test, fit interviews, all of that. And those are for paid positions only. Instead of working on a product, they're working on a research project that they come up together with their mentor, which is usually a PhD student like myself, and then often try to publish at a workshop or something. I'll just briefly hit on the last question that came up on who hires international students. My experience is in this space, it's extremely many academic or industry places just don't distinguish at all between local and international students. It's one of the easier ways to get a visa, a work visa.
I was just
Sorry, what was that, Tabitha?
No, you're good. I was going to add on to what John was saying about not just going to kind of the big companies. So I'm going to drop a link in the chat real quick. My previous employer, PAVE, was this nonprofit group called Partners for Automated Vehicle Education. It's 80 different people in the autonomous vehicle landscape, insurers, startups, the big companies, tech companies, car companies, that whole range of things. And I bring that up not because that's a place you need to go, but there are a lot of coalitions and I'd say uniting bodies in these spaces that I would highly recommend. If you can find those, they have website pages that show all of the major members who are working in those spaces. So it can be a really quick way to see a snapshot of all the different people who are involved in ABs, who are involved in health AI, if you can kind of narrow down on the domains. So yeah, just put that one in as an example of a place that I think people don't always think to go, but it can be a little bit easier to sort through than a LinkedIn, where you're just bombarded by AI searches or academic routes, as Rachel was mentioning. As far as job titles, people are pretty good about putting AI in there or machine learning pieces there. I mean, LinkedIn, I think, is still kind of currently the best way to find those spots. Reach out to somebody in particular. I think as Rachel's mentioning, my company's hiring, other people are. So if you have a chance to meet somebody, talk to somebody, send them a message on LinkedIn. People in this area, I think, are really passionate. They're really enthusiastic. So making those one-on-one connections, even if there's not an internship that already exists, sometimes there's interesting things that can come out of it.
Data scientists also
Yes.
can have, data scientist roles can also have a lot of overlap with machine learning. So I'd also recommend people look into data science internships and jobs.
Yeah, I was going to say that as well. Keep an open mind as far as titles, because it's still very immature in terms of exactly what title means what, and for a lot of companies, titles mean completely different things. Data scientist is a perfect example. There are large companies that hire data scientists that do internal statistical analysis and create PowerPoints for management. There are other companies like my old one we didn't have a title called machine learning engineer. We had data scientists, and they were putting machine learning models into production. What other companies might call a machine learning engineer. And so every company is very, very different in terms of job titles. So don't sort of set your sights and say, I want to be, this. Think more about what you want to do, and then keep an open mind about the different titles that are out there.
Great, awesome. I think that brings us to the end of the conversation. Catherine, I didn't know if you wanted to do some sort of outro, but I just wanted to thank, all three of you for the time and for engaging in the conversation and for letting our audience know, and me. I learned a ton from listening to you all as well. So thank you very much. I'm very, very appreciative.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for moderating it.
Absolutely.
Thank each of you for being here tonight. We will have this recording on our website in a few days. If you'd like to go back and revisit it, please note that there is a survey link in our chat that helps give us feedback on how to better programs like this. So it will take you no more than 3 minutes to complete. If you wouldn't mind doing that, that would be really helpful. It is the Qualtrics link that Lauren has posted in the chat. We really appreciate you all being here tonight, and take care. Thank you.